So, Jack, just to wrap this up, first of all, thank you very much for all the time you spent with me, allowing me to
Well, it's very
visit with you. And
I think somebody wants to know. I'm sure every war veteran, just like the guys all going to Normandy these days,
yeah,
like to be remembered.
we like to be remembered, and to me, it's not any kind of a worship type thing. It's a respect thing and an admiration for what you, not just your war years, but your lifetime in aviation. And to me, knowing you like I do, you're really a pilot's pilot, and there's a lot that we can learn from people like you. But I'm talking too much.
No.
Is there anything you want to say that would summarize your career in aviation or your life in general? If you had it to do over again, I'm sure you'd say yes. Any highlights? Just kind of an ending summary of what you can think of.
Well, to me, the critical point, or just maybe not the right word, is a wartime experience. Not everybody has an opportunity to have that experience, so it certainly had a positive impact on my growing up, I'd say, at that time. But of course, it had the same thing for every young guy in my position, and I'm sure it had the same effect for everybody in the Normandy Beach invasion too. It was a life changer. So it was really a unique event in our lives. But you can't take any credit for that. That was just the times. We just happened to be born then. So there you go. Since then, my view of my career has been that just a very narrow-minded one. I've just been interested in airplanes, loved airplanes, and tried to work with and help everybody else like airplanes. It's been a kind of a single-minded life, you might say. I see constantly, I run into people that are flirting with airplanes a little bit, but don't get serious about it. And, well, take my own son, for example, Johnny, I just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Johnny is so low, and I guess he's got around 400 or 500 hours, but he never has brought himself to consider airplanes as the primary thing in his life. He's had a career of his own, right, which is wonderful, but it's just not what I had. I've only had the airplanes. So that's not maybe good or bad, I don't know. I'm not going to argue, but it sure, for me, has been provided me with the feeling I wanted for my own life. It's been a great time. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
You started out as a kid making airplanes.
Yeah.
What do you think, was it anything like, that was the golden era of aviation that was happening when you were growing up.
Yeah.
People like Lindbergh and stuff and others. Did you remember like thirsting to read their stories or reading comic books about Smiling Jack or anything like that might have influenced you?
No, comic books never got my attention one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I certainly read everything I could about the pilots and the airplanes in those days.
Yeah.
Those days were what you'd call flashbulb points. Today aviation has a certain aura, I guess you could say, but back then airplanes were just coming into that level of importance to me and to other people like me. 50 years before that, it was trains that caught every young kid's attention. Mm-hmm. But by then it was airplanes. And today I guess it's space and rockets. I don't know, it does change. But that was just the period I happened to be born into. So it was wonderful for me. I've often wondered if I'd had a 50-year different time period, what I would have done, but it doesn't make any difference. I had my day, so that's all I need. I had airplanes and I didn't want anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess one of the ways to say it is you're steeped in airplanes. Not just flying the full-scale airplanes wasn't enough. You also had to fly models, build and fly models, and
Yes.
try to
Flight, the only common trend you can find in that is flight itself.
right.
I've often thought about that, but there was moments when I thought, well, maybe I would give up flying full scale and just fly models.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't happen, but it could have, you know. It's just it was kind of that close to the line.
Yeah.
But it was just the idea of they being able to control an airplane in the air.
Yeah.
When I was first building models, one of the things I did was with the early rubber-powered models, long before gas engines, I would build a cockpit into the model. Now, a little bitty dime store size model. I'd build a cockpit into it and put a control stick and put threads to control the surfaces.
Oh, boy.
And the only thought I ever achieved as that young, when I was that young, that was when I was 4 or 5 years old, was to run alongside, reach into it, and move the stick.
Right.
I can remember that impression. But of course, then you can see that when RC finally came along in the 40s, that was just what I was waiting for. Up to then, I just flew free flight. So where your whole aim is to learning to build the airplane that has the stability to fly and to set the angles of the surfaces so that it flies a certain path and will therefore be under some control, you might say, so it didn't fly away. Most of the flying in those days in the 30s was totally free flight. Just the idea was to see who could fly the longest and the furthest. They had lots of contests for distance and speed. And that was a trim problem.
Mm-hmm.
But the bigger challenge was to get it to fly a certain pattern in the air and to stay where you were.
Well, part of the challenge was even to get the engine to start, wasn't it?
Well, no, it wasn't any engines nose.
Oh, that was rubber power. Yeah.
Rubber powered.
Yeah.
The first engines came along, it was a little bit of a problem, but that didn't take long to overcome. Every kid or person can figure out how to make a combustion engine work pretty quick.
Also, they were actually ignition engines with a spark plug, which is a little easier than, I think they start easier than a glow engine.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's easier.
Yeah.
I think the glow plug system was actually more standard.
Mm-hmm.
Once they figured out, they did away with the glow plug.
Yeah, it's funny how it goes full circle now. It's coming clear back around to gas engines with spark plugs and ignition systems.
Well, there's some advantage to each one, I guess. Depends on what you're trying to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all, most people that are not in the hobby and even, well, it could be boats as well as airplanes, not just airplanes.
What would you say were this video is not really about your family and your life story as a person. It's more about the aviation side. I'm sure that your number one highlight of your life was marrying Jean, and having children would be number 2 or 3 or 4. But as far as aviation goes, what are the 3 or 4 really memorable things that you're really proud and glad you were involved in? I know you were the Galaxy, the C-5A Galaxy chief, were you the chief pilot?
Yes.
Yeah. And you were heavily involved with the 130, you were in World War II, you were airline pilot for a while. What kind of comes to mind?
Well, the C-5 is outstanding as the pinnacle of my actual full-size airplane career.
Okay.
It was a pinnacle of aviation itself, but for me personally, because I was so involved in it, and as you said, I was fortunate enough to be chief pilot of Lockheed that was building it at that time, and my title was C-5 project manager, which gave me an office and a staff to deal just with the C-5 itself in the in-flight operations. Of course, the big plant was building the C-5. There were thousands of people involved in one way or the other in engineering and construction up there, but down the flight line, my office was it for the C-5.
Mm-hmm.
Everything came into and out of there. So it was a high point, all right. And just as an interesting point, in my personal view of myself, you might say, it's what that very description is what got me out of Lockheed. I was so involved in the C-5, and the public and Washington was making such a hullabaloo about some faults of the C-5, and Lockheed was going along with it. They never said a word. They just hushed up and didn't say anything, and I was so incensed by that. It personally struck me personally, because I thought we ought to stood up on our hind legs and defended the airplane, because it was fine.
Was it over budget or something?
By multi-millions of dollars.
Okay.
Yeah. And a senator named Proxmire had his heart set against it for some reason, just politics probably, because that's all they care about. But he was finding everything he could wrong with the program and blaming Lockheed Design and trying to run Lockheed out of business and kill the C-5 project. And Lockheed didn't defend against it. As I know now, that was very smart on their part. It took a lot of willpower, you might say, but they just kept quiet and it finally died down. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, right in the middle of that, I couldn't stand it. That's when I left Lockheed. I said, I can't tolerate this personally. It just I didn't like it. I don't know how to describe it.
Right.
And that probably was a mistake for me. I've thought about it a lot of times whether I should have done that or not, relative to what was good for me or not. If I'd stayed with Lockheed, I can see one career I could have had, but the career I've had otherwise has been very interesting, and I enjoyed it, so I don't know if I was bad or not. But I've been very fortunate and been able to have good flying jobs all my career. But I think also something that's a little bit separate is the instruction thing. I've enjoyed very much the opportunities and the ability to do a lot of training with pilots, and I've enjoyed a lot of the pilots that I've trained and met and learned to enjoy them, and made a lot of very good friends, including you, through that process. Well, I don't know whether for you it was models or the 150, but a little of both, I guess. But
yeah,
a lot of people along the way that I can remember now, that I can pick up all the friends I've had, and they either were modelers or full-size pilots. I had a big bunch of everyone, each for everyone.
Yeah, and the people who are both full-size pilots and modelers. I mean, like the guys I have coffee with, 3 out of 4 of them are avid modelers, but they're also full-scale pilots.
Yeah, there's always a bunch of those.
Yeah.
Just before I moved out here, for 2001, for instance, we moved out here. The 10 years just before that, my group of friends, almost without exception, were all modelers and full-size.
Right.
I don't know why, just with that period. Before that it wasn't the same, and since then I've left them, of course. But
that's because they eat and drink and sleep anything with wings, I guess.
And the heart of that bunch was Wallace, as you heard the name so much.
Yeah.
He was a friend that's been with me through all of both. I taught him to fly in 1947.
Yeah.
Right after the war.
Right.
When I first got my instructor's license, he was one of the first students I had. And he's flown, and strangely enough, as I told you a little while ago, he's one of the 2 people that are actually fearful of flying. But he also enjoys it and has been a part of it. He's owned at least half a dozen airplanes, his own now. When I first met him, he was a kid in school and taught him to fly. And he could only fly if he could try and bring a model airplane to the airport and trade to me for flying time. The only way he got to fly. And that went on for quite a few years till I got my first FBO operation for full-size airplanes at Fulton County Airport. And he was working somewhere at that time. And after I'd started there in the first week or two, one day he just showed up at the door. Said, "I'm going to work out here with you." And so he did, and he worked through that period with me. And then when politics got me out of there and dropped that operation, went back into Lockheed, and he was forced, you might say, out to go make a living on his own. And he got a job as a salesman for some beauty products, I think, something like that, for a while. And then a little bit later, he had a business opportunity, you might say, with I don't know how I got into it, with a company that distributed. They didn't make any O-rings, they distributed O-rings and sold them all around. And Wallace his niche in life was as a salesman. He found out about that company somehow and went to work for him. And the first thing you know, he and the friends he developed bought the company, and he made $1 million overnight. He was such a good salesman. And he's been flying all the time. After that, I went to another operation at McCollum Airport, and he quit and came and worked for me there until I had Lockheed. I was still working for Lockheed, and Lockheed wanted to send me out of town. I had to turn loose for that operation. So Wallace was out of a job again. He went back selling O-rings and grew all the time. So his career went on from there. O-rings providing the money, and he provided the skill, you might say, to sell the O-rings and buying airplanes, always flying with me.
One of the things I think is you might say a bullet item from your career story is that of instructing, both as a full-scale pilot and as a RC pilot. You were multiple times FBO and instructor pilot for civil aviation, private aviation, but you also, what was the flight services? There was a company you worked for that taught people how to fly bigger planes. What was that company? The flight, something, I think, not flight services. The one where you were flying, and I think you were flying the Lockheed. The one where you were holding the beer can, that company.
Oh, I wasn't teaching anybody to fly then.
I thought you were teaching ground school. You had classes.
No, that was at Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was there 3 years flying that airplane for one man. That's all I did.
Okay. Well, there was another one where you were.
But after I went there, from there I went to California to fly for another company with that was Jetstar, and I went to California for a company that was flying a Gulfstream, bigger airplane. I worked for them 2 years and got to be chief pilot there. And then when I left there, I went back to Marietta, Georgia again, and that's where looking for a job. I worked at the Cartersville Airport for a while as a fixed base operator, ran airplanes and everything for a year, and then got a job with flight safety.
Flight safety.
That's where you got the
flight
picture
safety
in the classroom with students and everything. I worked there for a whole 10 years, long enough to retire from flight safety, but that was a different life, you might say, than the previous ones.
Were you actually getting airtime at flight safety?
No.
It was ground. It was a
classroom. Had a simulator which was just like it, but wasn't airtime.
What was the simulator of?
Jetstar.
Okay.
Flight safety specializes in certain airplanes that are popular, I suppose, popular enough for them to spend the money on a school and a simulator, which is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Big money, millions of dollars. But when they picked the Jetstar, it was way out of production, but there was still a lot of them around, and it was pretty good business. For the 10 years I was there, we had a constant class coming through every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 1 week sometimes, refreshers we call it, and early, what's the word, original people getting checked out at JetStar would come through the 2 week class, and people who'd been flying for a while every year came 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
Flight safety was a genius-run business. A fellow named Al Ucci ran it. He sold his business at flight safety training to corporate aviation worldwide, and must have done it. I'm sure he made all the money he wanted out of it, but it was certainly a big business there. And where I was there at Marietta, where Lockheed is at Marietta, this flight safety was there. I don't know, that was pretty much a coincidence that they decided to put a JetStar school where Lockheed was. They could have decided otherwise, but that's the way it was. So I was at the same place, and Lockheed was across the road, and flight safety was on this side. And I had another 10-year period with the JetStar then. I'd already had 10 years with, at least with the JetStar, probably 15 really. And I had another 10 years there. And that got me through that 10-year period into the 90s. And in the 90s I became I'm trying to find the right word for the guy can give check rides. I can't think of the word.
Check pilot?
Huh?
The check pilot? No.
Yeah, but the FAA has a word for it, and I can't think of the word. But anyhow, I became an examiner for pilot licenses there, and through the early 90s, for several years there, I was an examiner, giving check rides to the local area there in Georgia.